right along for our next conversation. We've actually touched on this a little bit earlier in the day, but now we're going to take it one step beyond by actually merging the two industries of sports and entertainment, sportainment, as it were. And it's an industry with a life of its own, and it's one in which is growing rapidly all the time. In our upcoming fireside chat, led by renowned business leader Sir Sorrell, he'll share with us innovative strategies and future trends which are driving this dynamic industry born from the intersection of two giant fields. They're very excited, clearly. I haven't even had the chance to introduce them yet, but here they are. Your moderator, Aleix Gabarre Fibla, Chief Strategy Officer at Summa, and Sir Sorrell, Executive Chairman at S4 Capital. Gentlemen, enjoy it. Take it away.
Good morning.
Morning.
Or good afternoon, is it? It's good afternoon, technically.
Technically speaking, it is.
God, there's not many of you. Where are you all?
Yeah, I mean, this is supposed to be like the big one. So what's happening? Well, anyway.
Everybody's enjoying themselves in Sevilla instead of sitting inside a darkened room.
Could be. Well, anyway, I think we can start, and I hope people will chip in. And also, by the way, let you know that we will try to leave something like 5 minutes for questions from the audience if somebody wants to ask something to Sir Martin. So before that, let's just...
Yeah, it'd be good to make this as interactive as possible.
Absolutely,
I think there are microphones around the room. If there aren't, we'll get them. And so it'd be good to get your thoughts or questions from you. Okay.
Yeah, as you can see, this is going to be an interesting conversation because we are already just chatting. But just to contextualize a bit this chat, because this panel talks about this kind of bizarre concept of sportstainment. And there are so many definitions of that. Sometimes when we talk to football clubs or to organizations, sports organizations who say, well, football needs to evolve, football needs to be close to new forms of entertainment, there are so many different angles to understand that and to articulate that it's a privilege, and we're going to make the most of having somebody who has been in this industry for decades and has an awful lot of experience in entertainment from many, many different angles. To talk about that, to talk about this intersection between sports and entertainment, why is it important now? Why is now a point of conversation? And what it actually means and how it's actually going to impact, especially football clubs or football organizations. So I think we can start by that.
Sure.
Because when people talk about sportstainment or sports as entertainment, how do you understand that? What is your operating definition of that?
Yeah, well, I think you're competing for people's time. Mm-hmm. You're competing for my time, your time, anybody else's time. They have many different things. You know, we have our families, we have our careers. We may be doing some things in a social context. And there are only 24 hours in a day. We haven't figured out a way of expanding that yet. So you're really competing for people's time. So you compete against not just other sports, but other entertainments, gaming, spending your time on AI or on the blockchain or the metaverse. We'll get into the implications of that. So you have to look at it holistically. My background in sports is, I worked for Mark McCormack. That was my second job out of business school for many years. And actually, Mark is an interesting person in the sense that he was one of the first people to professionalize sport. He was a lawyer. He was a scratch golfer. He met Arnold Palmer, famous golfer, my generation, maybe people have forgotten who Arnold Palmer is. I doubt it, but Arnold Palmer. And he managed Arnold Palmer, Gary Player, and Jack Nicklaus. And what Mark did, which is really interesting from the point of view of your question, he turned what he enjoyed doing, what was fun, namely golf, into a profession. He was a lawyer. He was at university with Arnold Palmer. That's where he met him. He played golf with Arnold Palmer, but he was also a lawyer. And he basically said to Arnold, you need professional help. So that's one experience. I suppose the second, we owned a piece of Media Pro. When I was at WPP, we owned 40%, I think it was, of Media Pro, which is now Chinese-owned, I think, or Chinese-controlled. Gone through several iterations. I had that sort of experience at that. But then latterly with Formula One, where I was a director for 9 years when it was owned by private equity. And we can get into that because I think it has importance. But all of those people that I'm talking about understood what we're talking about. Namely, you're competing for people's time. And that's the key. So creating an experience that the consumer, the fan values is critically important. Not looking at it, in the case of football or soccer, 90 minutes. It's not the 90 minutes of the game that counts. Obviously, the players are critically important, but it's not just about the players. We can get into what is the relationship between players and clubs with leagues, and leagues with football associations, whether they be European or worldwide.
So how many hours we have to unpack that?
But essentially, it comes back to you're competing for people's time. So the parallel to entertainment and the parallel to all forms of entertainment is critically important. And there's a funny thing, I mean, your career and entertainment sort of fuse. There's a lot of things that we do in the course of, at S4, at Media Monks, our operating brand, a purely digital company, a lot of things that we do that we find fun. It's not work, it's fun. And it's like McCormack, he loved golf, so what did he do? He wanted to professionally manage golfers, so he fused the two. Mm-hmm. So it is fun, as you know.
Okay, so there are so many things in that answer that we need to unpack. So first of all, you were saying that clubs and any sort of content, let's call it that, is competing for people's time. If I am somebody working at a football club, does that mean that all of a sudden I have to have, I don't know, a Netflix documentary, or I'm supposed to create a video game, or am I supposed instead to transform my own activities, my own day-to-day activities in a different way? What's the balance here?
Well, if I take sort of case studies, having done business school degree, I sort of love case studies. So I think the best way, I was on the board, I say, of CVC-owned F1. And I think when Liberty, Malone, and others at Malone's operation took over Formula One, there was some degree of cynicism amongst, let's say, the old guard at Formula One as to whether it would work. And I think the truth is that it has worked, certainly for the first 5, 6, 7 years. And to what you just said, it was interesting. If you ask people, why is it that F1 has gone to another level? They would say it was the Netflix documentary series. That opened it up, created fan engagement with the drivers, with the teams, with the spectacle that hadn't existed before. Formula One probably was a more upper crust, less mass, narrow-based thing. And I think, actually, interestingly, you mentioned Netflix. I mean, our research shows, it's YouTube and Twitter and TikTok are the channels that people should be engaging with. And of course, you've got lots of issues to deal with. Gen Z, our research shows that Gen Z viewers are more interested in highlights than historically my generation and other generations, and they're more interested in the highlights than the actual event. So packaging highlights in an effective way through digital media is critically important. So just go through the facts, because I think the facts are important. The media industry, which you all are trying to engage with, is about 900 billion worldwide, and about 2/3 of that is digital. Remember that Google accounts for about 225 billion of that. Facebook and Meta account for about 125 billion this year of that. I'm talking about ad revenues. And Amazon about 50 billion. And Amazon will probably go to about 100 billion. And you know how those platforms have recently got engaged much more in sport. You know, people poo-pooed the idea that any of the big platforms would do, but now Google, Meta, and Amazon, along with TikTok or ByteDance, Alibaba, and Tencent, those are the 6 big platforms, plus Microsoft, plus Apple, plus NVIDIA, maybe ARM, maybe the Salesforce, Adobe, Oracle, all these companies, those are going to be the big players. And the big will just get bigger, by the way. I don't think, because technology companies are so important from a national security point of view, both defense, not just defense, but offense, I think what you will see, and with the coming of AI and AGI, what you will see is those companies become even more significant. So they are really important to engage with, and I'm afraid to say it, I shouldn't say it, but I will, that the problem for the football clubs and the football industry is it is not a huge industry. I mean, the largest company, largest club probably does less than $1 billion of revenue, which is not to be sneezed at, obviously, but is on the small side, employing probably 750, 1,000 people. So you are talking about relatively small companies. Getting bigger, a lot of interest, a lot of development, and you also got owners, and again, maybe this is a somewhat controversial thing to say, but I think owners who view the clubs as sort of personal properties. They're almost trophy properties. It's like, you know, in the old days, people would buy newspapers or they'd buy television stations and they would have trophy properties. And I often feel that clubs are not purchased for business reasons, i.e., make long-term profits. We can go into that. I think that's the best definition of long-term profitability. But they're done for personal reasons. Somebody might live in a community. A football club is a community asset as well as being owned by the owner, which we found out when we had the Super League posited as a possibility. So it's a very complex organization, actually, because it's not just a private company or a listed company. It is part of the community. But the people who own them, often I think, own them because they want to buy and sell them, or for trophy asset reasons, rather than run them as a business. So it's a bit droll to say it, but professionalizing it is a critical point. I asked, when I got here this morning, what is top of mind of people at this conference, and I was told governance. That's a boring word in itself, but it's critically important. And I think how these companies are run, and I go back to the Formula One example. If you said to me, what is probably the best example in my experience of taking a business or a sporting business to another level, it is F1. Bernie Ecclestone ran it extremely effectively. He was a very successful entrepreneur, took it from nothing in the 1970s and 80s into, he sold it effectively to Malone, I think, for about, or CVC did for about 5 billion, 6 billion. I think its market cap is sort of 3 times that, or 2 to 3 times that now. And the reason for it was that they saw it in a different way. The Netflix thing is one example. Opening up America. Formula One was something that never really got any traction. We did have Grand Prix at Watkins Glen in the northeast part of the United States, but it never really took on as Indianapolis or road racing in America, or those track racing tournaments had taken on. And what Liberty have managed to do with Austin, and now with coming Las Vegas, obviously with Miami, is build it into a much more significant sport in the world's largest economy. The US is 28 trillion out of 100 trillion. So it's almost 30% of the world economy. And therefore, with a population that is extremely interested in sports and entertainment. So I think that's a very good case study of it. I mean, other case studies that come to my mind, Bob Kraft, who owns the New England Patriots, also owns the soccer franchise in Boston, which will host part of the World Cup when the World Cup goes to the US. He understands it too. Now, he's a Harvard Business School graduate. He owns I think one of the biggest packaging companies in the world, probably the second largest after Smurfit, I think, in the world, private company. And in addition, the Patriots and, as I say, the soccer franchise in Boston, New England. And he understands the business demands and needs. He understands that it's an experience. His development of the Gillette Stadium, first of all, he got Gillette as his sponsor, but the development around the Gillette Stadium, the retail, hotel development there is extraordinary. And he understands that you're not just catering for the 90 minutes of a soccer game, but he understands it's about the fan experience and the consumer experience, and you're selling an experience to consumers. So that would be another one. NFL and NBA, I think, from the point of view of organizations, are extremely well run and effective. They have their issues. But the NBA in particular, I would call out, because there's a lot of central control there. When you talk to the commissioner of the NBA, you're talking about a much more cohesive organization than you often find in these organizations. So those are some of the examples that I've come across I haven't had major flirtations with sports, but Formula One, McCormack, the Patriots, I would say those NBA, NFL are examples of it.
Okay, so you were talking about the importance of essentially building a business, rather than simply owning something, which makes me think about the extreme disparity between the brand awareness of a lot of these clubs and the actual revenue that they have. And I remember comparing brand awareness of clubs like FC Barcelona, Real Madrid, Manchester United, to ones of Nike, Google, Apple, and yet the revenues have nothing to do. So there's clearly something to be done in terms of monetization, in terms of actually making that awareness perform. So I want to hear from you about that.
But the brands, club brands, are so strong. And they're strong not just because it's not just about the club, it's not just about the players, it's about the community.
Okay, that's important.
So it's probably 3 C's: club, community, and well, 2 C's and 1 P. It's quite complex, and you saw it with the Super Club Championship in Europe. That what happened there was, the owners might think they own the clubs, but the fans think they own it too. I mean, in Germany, I think I'm right in saying most of the clubs, if not all, are owned by the fans. And in fact, there was when Abramovich was selling Chelsea, there was an interesting little wrinkle to it that the pitch itself, the physical pitch, had been sold to the fans, and one of the complexities, I'm told, on reading about it, was who actually physically owned the pitch, because they'd sold off blocks of the pitch to things. So, but it's the fans, it's part of the community, and that's where it is so complex, and it's a difficult thing to balance. I think in soccer, obviously the players are paid enormous sums. It's interesting that CEOs get chastised in the UK for their pay. There's an example this week with Pearson, where an ex-Microsoft executive is becoming CEO, and there's a lot of criticism of the pay that he was offered because he was giving up his Microsoft options. It was £13 million. Well, no comment is made about what the latest wages or signing on fee or whatever it is of football players is. So it's a pretty unique environment. And given its scale and size, I mean, I don't know. It'd be interesting to run the numbers, what players' wages as a proportion of total revenues are.
It's a very significant number, yes.
And raises the issues of salary caps. Of course, the Americans have sort of sorted that out more effectively, and they've got some more balance into the system. It doesn't mean that the athletes are not well paid, they are, but there's a more balance in the system. So it's a very complex thing. I mean, I think the things that you need to focus on, obviously the governance issue is, I don't like that word, but say the management issue. The professionalizing of the management is critically important. The monetizing of it is critically important, to think about how digital is playing an increasingly important role in that. I mean, just to give you one little example of the impact of digital. So last week at the Outside Broadcasting Conference in Amsterdam, we announced an exclusive partnership with NVIDIA, the chip maker, with AWS, Amazon's cloud, and Adobe. And that is to provide outside broadcasting services. So typically, if you're filming an event, you will buy a truck. You'll invest about $7 to $8 million in an outside broadcasting truck. Remember what I said about Gen Zers liking the idea of highlights. That broadcasting approach and that system may well not be the best system when you can provide through AWS, through Adobe, and critically NVIDIA, a cloud-based AI-generated service at $100,000. Huge shifts are taking place in technology. And and this is a criticism, and I think it's a valid criticism, in our experience of dealing with football clubs, they're often very unwilling to take any risk. Their attitude is, you pay me. It's a bit like Bernie Ecclestone with, I took Lucian Grange to see Bernie Ecclestone. Lucian is the head of Universal Music, so controls, I think, 40% of all music that's published and distributed around the world. And I took him because I said to Bernie, you know, you look at the Singapore Grand Prix, you have all these pop concerts running from Thursday to even Monday after the race on a Sunday for the fan experience, as part of the experience. And Lucian walked in and started talking to Bernie, and Bernie said, what are you going to pay me for it? And it's that mentality that, you know, you have the club, you have the players, you have the shirt, you sell the shirt. Selling the shirt in and of itself is not the end of it, right? It is building that relationship. And one of the interesting things about women's football that we've seen is that the fan engagement of women's football is far greater with the players.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah.
Than it is with the male game. And that's, you know, sad because, I mean, we've heard in the last, I would say, few months that despite, you know, the rise of the women's game, obviously wages,
that's an issue. Yeah.
Equality of wages is an issue, quite rightly. And then there's also an issue around sponsorship, because from what I hear, it's more difficult to sell, market female sponsorship. So packaging it up as men's and women's, I think, is the way to go. I think that's, and women's sponsorship can prove to be very interesting. Sponsors are really interested in value. So data is really important. So first-party data with your fans. I mean, we did a session with some younger men and women who are doing MBA courses or MA courses and bachelor's courses. And I asked for some examples, the best examples of first-party data.
Okay.
In the digital world, Google is saying we're going to deprecate, we're going to phase out third-party cookies. So this is information from second or third parties, not client or fan information. And I asked actually which clubs had the best experience with fans, and was told Frankfurt, I think, was mentioned, and PSG was mentioned. Mm-hmm. And it was a very diverse group, probably about 15, 20 young men and women from all around the world. So I thought that was really interesting. And first-party data is absolutely critical. I mean, AI basically uses data as its fuel, and understanding the demographics of your fan base, collating them effectively is really important. Give you an example. H&M in the UK has 18 million customers. They know inside out. Over the last 4 or 5 years, or whatever it is, they've built a database, and they know everything. So that is hugely important in developing commercial applications, whether it be digital, fan-based, or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I have so many things to cover, but to just start with wrapping up, because we was a bit bad on time. So, okay, you've talked about AI, or picked AI. We might talk a bit about the metaverse too, and
yes,
whether Web3 is still something worth considering.
I think it's not fashionable to say it, but if you said to me, what are the technological things, blockchain is really important. Mm-hmm. Not crypto. Mm-hmm. I'm in the Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger camp. I don't understand it. But blockchain, which basically reduces frictions inside distributed systems, or inside systems, eliminating middlemen, middle women across the board. That's one. Mm-hmm. Number two, metaverse. I have a healthcare issue at the moment, a cancer issue at the moment, so I spent a fair bit of time dealing with hospital organizations. The applications of the metaverse in health, in entertainment, in sports, in music. We stream the NBA games on the metaverse. Yep. So you're courtside virtually, right? Huge. That should be applied to every sporting league. It should be applied to FIFA. It should be applied to UEFA. There's a rights issue. You go to the NBA, I said it's much more centrally run. Yeah. You can execute. NFL is much more complex. NHL is more complex. But the metaverse, sports, entertainment, music, training, work from home, work from anywhere, which is really important from the point of view of everybody in this audience, because it's the engagement with those people when and where they are. They're not necessarily going to be in the office Monday to Friday. In fact, people are telling me that Friday is gone. The question is whether Monday is gone as well. If you just think about that for a minute, people will have a 3-day weekend, maybe even a 4-day weekend. It may be that AI and AGI is going to do what John Maynard Keynes, the famous economist, said in 1933, automation will give us more holidays, will make us happier, we'll have more holidays. Maybe that is happening. If you think about people's leisure time, work-life balance, what we're talking about, competing for their time, becomes even more important. Yep. So anyway, blockchain, metaverse, AI, AGI. AI is affecting our business in terms of creating ads. We can create them much faster. It's affecting our business that we can personalize ads. If we have the first-party data and the signals from the platforms, from Google, et cetera, Meta and Amazon, et cetera, if we have that data, we can personalize ads on a one-to-one basis even more effectively than we do for Netflix or Disney. That's number two. Media planning and buying will become totally algorithmic, certainly on digital, which is 2/3 of the market, will be 75% of the market in a couple of years' time. It enables us to become more efficient. Take the OBS example I gave you of the truck versus the cloud computing execution. And then finally, it democratizes knowledge. Because AI will be available, if you want it to be available, to everybody in your organization. It'll flatten it, and everybody will know. So people will not be able to control verticals inside organizations by control of information. So AI is hugely important, AGI, and then quantum computing with increased power and applicability hugely as well. So all those shifts have huge implications for what we're talking about, and the football industry, or the football entertainment industry that we're talking about.
Okay, so there's certainly like a purely technological angle to that, but I'm interested in how this impacts, how it transforms the relationship with communities. Because as you were saying, one of the things that makes football, sports in general, interesting as a business is there's this community, this passional angle to that.
Well, you look at what Ryan Reynolds did with Wrexham.
Exactly, for example.
I mean, that emotionally, I'm not a Wrexham supporter. I'm not Welsh. But, emotionally, it was wonderful to see a relatively minor club, and you saw the passion around the community, and it took Hollywood to tap into it. I mean, it's a good example of your first question. I mean, it's really, where's the boundary between sports and entertainment? In that case, there isn't any. Same with F1, there isn't any. It becomes part of your life, whether it be Verstappen or whether it be Hamilton or whatever it happens to be. So it's really building the experience in as broad a fashion as possible.
And is that experience going to be like, let's put it that way, because sometimes when we talk about all these shifts, especially with all the technological shifts or the business shifts that are happening, I'm sometimes afraid that we tend to picture in our mind like something that feels like, okay, this is new product, let's apply this new product, rather than here's this opportunity to engage with this passionate community in a different way. And I'm interested in that. I'm interested in how bridging, let's put it that way, the cold heart of AI versus the hot passion of
I mentioned the 5 things that we see going on inside our industry. I mean, and that's happened in a relatively short period of time. And Google have been working on AI since 2014, so you could argue that it isn't that short a period of time, I guess. But it's, in terms of what triggered it, was Microsoft's investment in OpenAI. They invested $5 billion or whatever it was in OpenAI, and that really triggered Google's response. We've seen the rise of NVIDIA, into a $1 trillion company by market cap. So these things are going to impact everything that in terms of the experience that the fan has with football. I mean, all these technologies, all the pressures on our time. I mean, I don't know about you, but you get up this morning fairly early and you get hit by all these messages coming in from everywhere, all these changes that are taking place. It's quite interesting. I mean, just on that for a minute, way away from football, but I find it amazing that 4 of the members of the UN Security Council didn't turn up in New York this week. The only member of the Permanent Council that turned up was Joe Biden, and that's probably in part due to the rise of the global South, misnamed because there are northern countries as well, and it's very relevant to football. Actually, this it may sound far away, but it's really important. The rise of LATAM, which I think creatively and technologically is a much underrated continent, and that block between North and South America, the rise of the Middle East and its involvement in sport. I mean, the Arabian governments are very cleverly and wisely, in my view, using sport, using that entertainment, whether it be golf or tennis, muted, or martial arts, or football, to embed themselves culturally. I mean, all these sports have strong community interests, and if you want to build your your reputation. I mean, I remember when I was at F1, you know, Bernie Ecclestone would go and talk to heads of state, and he would say, if you want to change the image of your country, you have three sports. You have World Cup, Olympics, and F1. Mm-hmm. We can argue about the IPL, but that's very narrow. I mean, it's another case study that everybody should look at. That is probably the best example, actually, of commercialization. Look at how Mukesh Ambani, you know, the chairman and chief executive, I think he's still chief executive of Reliance, India's most wealthy man, and his wife, Nita, have managed to build that sport along with other Indian entrepreneurs. I mean, Reliance permeates everything. Jio permeates everything around the IPL. So really good examples of people using technology. Bob Kraft, I mentioned at New England, also building a state-of-the-art stadium for his soccer franchise in New England. So these are all good examples of people who are using technology in a really sophisticated way to build the experience that the fan has, the travel experience, the food and entertainment experience whilst they're there, all of that sort of thing. So there's really some other good examples.
It's really bridging all together rather than having like partnerships with different people. It's more like what's the whole thing.
Yeah, I think on sponsorship, I think clubs have really not leveraged it in the way that they should have done, and they've not worked with the sponsors. You know, I remember when I was at McCormack, Jackie Stewart was a world champion, I think 3 times, and he was probably the best example of a player, a driver, engaging with his sponsors.
Okay,
his relationships with Rolex, with Ford. I mean, he ended up selling his team to Ford Motor Company, if you remember. So he built incredible relationships. And he was extremely persistent. HSBC, sponsorship. He understood how important it was to give the sponsors value. And it wasn't, I'm buying a sponsorship on a shirt, here's my X million for that. It was building it into it, and he really worked at it. I mean, he really put his heart and soul into it and was really engaged and thought about it as a long-term relationship. His relationship with Rolex must go back 30, 40, 50 years. So it's a really good example, and we're starting to see that with the football clubs as well. You know, Beckham now is a club owner. Messi will be a club owner, it looks like, in that deal they've done in Miami. So you're starting to see the players, they are brands. I mean, we were discussing it offline. I think everybody should watch. There's a BBC documentary, I think it's BBC, it's on the iPlayer, of Arnault and Pinault, Bernard Arnault, probably Europe's most successful businessman, and Pinault competing with one another in fashion. And they talk about the creative directors, Alexander McQueen, Tom Ford, etc. And you come away from that series, and they understood, Arnault and Pinault understand, that what's really important is the brand, not the creative director. Okay? So the analogy here is what's really important is the club and developing the brand around the club with the community as well as the fans and doing it. So everybody should watch that because they got it. Arnault and Pinault, Arnault in particular, he's the best manager of brands in the world in my view. He understands it. You should study what he does and you'll see how to get there.
Okay, amazing. As you can see, we could be talking for hours, literally hours about this, but we are completely off time.
We're being pulled off.
Sorry to be the cue to
thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Amazing conversation.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you. Just one thing. Anybody want to have a dialogue, which I'd love to have, Martin@s4capital.com. You just send me an email and we can Not all at once, but we're going to have a discussion about any point that we covered. Thank you.
Use that opportunity. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.